Welcome back to our Value Bite series. Today, we're going to get to dive into values and how that plays a part and the importance for you as a business owner, as well as a couple other hot takes from our guest today. So thank you, Andy, so much for joining us. We're really excited to learn more about you. But before we jump into the good details and your insights and expertise, tell us a little bit about your journey. I know you went from founding a web and graphics design firm to your current role as CEO of Tree and Leaf Partners. So what is that journey like? And tell us a little bit about how you serve owners now.
It's been a very interesting journey. It feels much longer than it probably has been. So I started, Get Simple was the name of our graphics design firm, probably about 15 years ago now. With a friend of mine, we had a common skill set and a common love of kind of solving this problem of many of our local shops in the high street were not on the internet at that point in time. It wasn't quite pre-internet, but it was definitely before kind of your local corner shop or appliance store had a web presence.
Right.
We felt that was a problem that we could help solve for a lot of the high street in the UK, where I'm originally from. So we did that for a couple of years, worked with some local charities, worked with some small businesses, and just helped bring them an up-to-date web presence online to give them a different way of reaching and connecting with their customers in what was becoming much more of a digital first
Right.
world. But we really love doing that. And that's where my love of using technology to solve problems really started. And that, I would say, is the kind of common strand between my different experiences. I did my original undergrad studies in electronic and telecommunications engineering. So really focused on technology. And what I didn't like about that was how narrow you ended up getting, which is often the case with kind of degree programs when you're focused on something. But I wanted to still keep this common thread of how do we use technology to solve bigger problems in the world? And that led me to IBM, where I spent the first 6 years of my actual kind of career post first entrepreneurial venture. And I was focused on helping our clients design more meaningful experiences for their customers and employees. So looking at the experience of you as an employee, or looking at the experience of one of your customers, mapping out the process that they go through to interact with you as a brand, and identifying where we were causing friction or frustration in that process, and bringing in technology to make it more streamlined to enhance that experience. So that love of using technology to solve problems was continued there. But as a third-party advisor, I can tell you until I'm blue in the face what you should do. And you, one, have to accept that I'm right. And even if you accept that I'm right, you have to actually do something about it before we actually drive change in the world and create a better place for everyone to live. So towards the end of my time at IBM, I decided it was time to leave and do something a little bit different, and to be on the other side of the table, go from an advisor to a leader within an organization where you have more ownership and accountability to actually drive that change within the organization you're working with. So I spent 2 years, I moved across the pond and went to Kellogg School of Management, did an MBA there for 2 years, and came across this idea of entrepreneurship through acquisition. And rather than starting a business from scratch, working with an existing founder that had built a business out, maybe over 20, 30 years, invested a lot of their time and energy into building something, but had a vision that was much bigger than their own lifetime. So they knew this business was going to carry on and be something great in the world, but we only have a certain number of years on this earth, and they knew that they were reaching kind of the end of their working time and ready to do something a little bit different. So I love that idea about joining in an existing vision and continuing to build that out and creating some sort of legacy within an organization. So I partnered with a group of investors and formed Tree and Leaf Partners. We're actually named after a collection of short stories that the English author J.R.R. Tolkien put together. And one of his stories was a little bit about that example, about a painter called Nigel that was capturing the immensity of the task that Tolkien felt he had at the beginning of writing the trilogy. And he knew it was going to be beyond his lifetime and bigger than himself. And it actually took him 30 years to write the trilogy after writing The Hobbit. And that seems very familiar with a lot of the business owners that I speak to that have spent 30 years really investing his business. But we know, kind of with the benefit of hindsight, that Tolkien kind of defined a genre and created a massive amount of change in the literature world beyond his lifetime. So I want to find a business owner that has that kind of vision for the impact that they want to have and partner with them to continue building that out.
Well, one, thank you so much for letting us get a look into what that journey has been like. And I think it's really cool and interesting how you can see that over the course of each of your roles, it really built and evolved and kind of taking what you started with and applying it to the next journey and bringing it all together. And the idea of first determining, okay, what is your vision? What are those gaps? And then bringing the solution in. It's such a powerful way, especially when, as you said, like technology is such a core part of what you do. And you can kind of do anything these days, right? But it's more about being able to figure out like what is the right thing for you when you think about what you care about. And for you yourself, being able to plug in and know that like one of the things that really gets you fired up is jumping into somebody else's vision and helping move that forward. And so I love that. And I think that's such a, not all of us have that type of viewpoint, right? Some people want to be like the originators and the first movers versus, you kind of have, it seems like more of that closer mentality, still visionary, still innovative, but coming alongside. So also, I'm really, okay. So I'm even more excited to jump into our topic because obviously you're someone that has seen the impact of vision, seen the impact of collaboration, and just the ability for technology to solve problems. So these are all important things, but let's jump in a little bit into values because the work that you've done and how you've come alongside businesses and worked with founders, values, I imagine, have had to play a key part in decision making and how you move forward. So, from your perspective, how does a clear alignment between a founder's values and business strategy, having that clear alignment, impact the long-term success of an organization?
We thoroughly believe that culture and values are part of what makes up what we consider culture, are the foundation of how we drive success. So often we measure success more quantifiably in profitability or growth or lifetime value of a customer. But that is only successful in the long term if we have a good foundation for where those metrics are coming from and a strong culture and a set of values that it's being built on. Otherwise, it's a bit like building on sand. You can only get so far. And then at some point, the wind comes, the rain comes and knocks the place down because we haven't built out that foundation. So for us as leaders, it's important to start with those core values and understanding the behaviors that we associate with those core values and how that aligns with the vision and the direction that we want the business to go towards and how the incentives are aligning people towards that. If we are kind of have a vision of maybe an organization that is low cost, for example, we're a low cost provider in the market, but our values are all centered around high quality, buying the best tools, paying the most money, delivering the best service, then that may work for a couple of months, maybe even a couple of years. But at some point, we're going to clash because the costs of running that service are going to outplay the strategy of being a low-cost provider. But if we've got the values like that and our strategy is to become a kind of high-end service, we may start as a low-end service and a low-cost price point, but because our strategy and values are aligned, we can raise the prices as we grow that business and as those costs grow to allow us to be consistent with that and build the business over time.
I really hear how that example, how it can show up that if you don't have that clarity, you really can be working against yourself and really getting into that insanity wheel and not getting to enjoy the fruits of your labor
Yeah.
and feeling like, man, I'm doing all of these things. I'm working so hard. I'm being strategic, but why am I not
Mhm.
propelling forward in the way that I feel like I should? So I really hear that that congruence is so important. So I'm curious to know, in your experience, so when you're working with an owner or a leadership team, so as owners, as individuals, we show up as owners with our own values.
Mhm.
Then we look at our organization, the business that we own, and there's values that exist there, right?
Mhm.
So what does that intersection look like? Like,
Mhm.
how important is it for the organization's values to align with the owner's values? Like, where does that come into play?
Yeah, I think there is a difference between kind of organizational values and personal values. But often, if we start an organization, our foundation for that organization often reflects a lot of our personal values. Now, they may adapt and change over time in the organizational context, even if they don't change in the personal context. But I think it always starts with understanding yourself and understanding what those values are, and then taking the time to understand where is the organization currently at and where does it need to go. So,
Mm-hmm.
for example, going back to our previous example, if you're a low cost provider, it could be because you as an owner are reasonably frugal in how you spend money, and therefore you want to offer a really good value service. But your strategy is to grow out this business and also to provide the best salaries to your employees and to give them the best tools to do it. So you may have two values that are perfectly consistent in your personal life, but then provide a bit of a conflict in how they play out within a workplace when you're trying to bring people together to solve a problem in the world and drive value. And part of that value creation is making a profit and running a business and doing that well. So I think there's a process of evaluating yourself and the organization and asking the question of where does this organization need to be? And how do I need to show up in that organization to help drive that change? Because a leader has kind of two jobs. They are forward focused. They're going, where does this organization need to be? And they are setting that example. And then they are very focused in the present of how can I take us from where we are to where we need to be. And that can include the values that the organization currently represents. A lot of the time, once an organization grows to a certain size, that initial influence of the founder on the values becomes diluted unless you've put in process the structure, the values, the behaviors, and then the norms that help establish and maintain that culture. So you may find that the organization has become a slightly different focus to what you would like it to be in the future. And your job as a leader is to help them to get from where they are to where they need to be and align those values. And that's where I think behaviors are really helpful in coming in, that values are almost a little aspirational sometimes for people to connect with and talking through, well, this is our value of integrity. So integrity means we do X, Y, and Z in the customer service department or X, Y, and Z in the sales department. Maybe we only do quotes that we've validated with the technical sales rep because we want to make sure we can deliver on that promise every time. So what are the behaviors associated with that value that help people make that connection with the vision and the values that you're heading towards? So I think it's important for leaders to be really practical at connecting those together.
I think that really resonates with me because it's this concept of like an idea is only as good as the action that you take. So, the values are important, but if we spend all of our time talking about this kind of, aspirational, this non-tangible thing, it's going to not propel us forward, and the behaviors and the actions ultimately are the only things that are
Mhm.
going to get us to the vision. So, I think that's such a great reminder to not get bogged down in so many of like, do the work, determine
Mhm.
your values, be intentional,
Yeah.
figure out what you care about and what you want to protect, but then make sure you're following through with the next step, which is kind of harder, right? Like
Mhm.
the behavior and the action. So, in the example that you gave and kind of what we've been talking about, there's definitely a theme of like this idea of being incongruent,
Mhm.
whether it's incongruent with your behaviors or incongruent with, what you actually value and what you're doing. So, if you're thinking about advice
Mhm.
for owners, that are wanting to create a balance between two things they care about. So, for example, wanting to create a balance between profitability and purpose in their
Mhm.
operations, or whatever those kind of two things may be. What advice would you give?
I think it's important that we have to do the work to work out what's actually in conflict and what's causing that conflict. Because it's interesting, a lot of the research around purpose and profitability says they're actually in alignment. A more purpose-driven organization can be more profitable. So you're not necessarily sacrificing profitability to be more purpose-led. What's an example of that? Well, people are human beings, and we used to think they were motivated by more money or consequences for their actions for not working. But there was a great book called Drive by Daniel Pink that talked about this concept of intrinsic motivation. And one of the intrinsic motivating factors is this idea of purpose and meaning and delivering value to the world. And this has become much harder as an organization grows bigger. We think about a car manufacturer, maybe Tesla in the early days, it would have been a small team. They're all focused on designing, building, and implementing this car. And you get a great sense of satisfaction seeing that end to end.
Mhm.
Now Tesla's grown to the scale it is. You probably have people whose sole job is to take a component from place A and put it in place B. It's very difficult for them to see the bigger picture and to see the value we're delivering to society and the meaning in the work that they're doing because we've divided labor so small. But that's also how we drive profitability in the business. If we're specialized and focused on one role, whether that's a marketing role or a sales role or fixing a component to a certain thing or spray painting the car, that helps us drive profitability in a business. But we've then got to do a lot more work as a leader to help paint that picture, to tell the story of the car being made and the role that people are playing. And I love the example of JFK visited NASA when they were doing their original mission to the moon. And he met the janitor who was working there and cleaning up the floors after hours. And he says, "Sir, what do you do here?" And the guy says, "I'm helping put a man on the moon." And that guy had a really good understanding that by creating a clean workplace, he was facilitating other people's roles that were perhaps more closely related to the purpose of the organization and the work that they were doing. But he had a good understanding of his role within that mission and purpose. So I think first it starts with kind of understanding, are things actually in conflict, or is that going to drive value? Because creating a sense of meaning for people is actually, there's some good case studies around companies that actually can pay below market rate because they have a very strong sense of purpose. There's a dog food toy company in New York. They pay below market rates because they're very focused on hiring people who want to solve problems for pets. And if people care about that vision and are invested in that, they're willing to take $5,000 less, $10,000 less to be working on something that's meaningful for them. I think that's why we see the nonprofit sector, that people are generally paid a lot less in the nonprofit sector because they have a close connection often with what the organization's doing and the purpose and the meaning and the value that they get out of that. And we've got to be careful not to exploit people by using that and making sure we're delivering, paying them value and paying them what they're worth. But we can use that as a tool to help us bring together people who care about the problem that we're solving and also help drive a more profitable business because we're all going to work that little bit harder if we care about that outcome. If we want to make sure that dog toy is safe for that dog, we're all going to work a little bit harder if we care about the dog than if we're 3 steps removed from that process and we don't actually care about it.
I think that, what you said in the beginning is first determining if there really is a problem, if there really is an incongruence. And oftentimes we can get ahead of ourselves and that our own perspective that that's like law. And it's really not necessarily that way, especially as you said, as the organization gets bigger and
Mhm.
shifts and maybe your own values or your own behaviors and actions do continue to get diluted.
Yeah.
It can be very easy to think that your perspective is the reality. And so I imagine that's something that you've had to kind of overcome with owners over the course of your journey.
Certainly, it's a topic of conversation that comes up in helping them understand that, and also how I would change things when I come in as well. That can create some conflict if that's in a different direction to what the owner's original vision was, and helping align people on that common vision and what was the core purpose of the organization and what's really important about what happens next to it. Is
Mhm.
it that the values are maintained even if we move into a different market, or is it more important that we generate profitability? Maybe that's the value of the owner and that's what they're focused on. So it's important to talk through that, because there'll always be a transition phase with any acquisition that we make. We work with the existing leadership team and the owners before they either transition out or transition into a different role within the organization. So we need to try and reduce conflict by having those conversations up front as well.
So, as you and your team are looking at acquiring a business, what are some of the key elements that you consider to ensure the company is not only profitable, but also aligned with your values around community, employee care?
It's really challenging in an acquisition scenario because you're dealing with imperfect information.
Mm,
And you often don't have direct access to the employees or the suppliers or the customers very early in that process. So, really evaluating kind of what is the culture like in this organization can be tricky. Secondly, we don't necessarily look for an organization that's the finished product. So we're looking for kind of inklings that they're heading in the right direction, that they have a common set of values, but maybe they haven't articulated them well, that they care about their employees. And that's obvious through kind of the questions that they're asking and what's important to them as part of the sales process. So in general, there's kind of three things we can look at and focus on. And the first is fundamentally with that owner of the business. How do they talk about their people? How have they made decisions in the past? What have they considered? What trade-offs have they made? What impacts do they foresee with the transaction? What do they care about as part of this process? Are they more worried about how many zeros are on the end of their check, or do they care about Bill and Sue in marketing and whether they have a job after this happens? Second thing we can look at is social media in this day and age. So often a lot of companies will be listed on Glassdoor. If they're a B2C organization, they'll have Google reviews or Yelp reviews. And this can give us a little bit of insight into perhaps kind of previous employees, current employees, or people who've interacted with the organization. What was their impression? How were they left with? What feeling did they inspire in those individuals when they interacted with that product or service? Is it positive? Are people having a good experience, or is it negative? And what's driving that negativity, and what do we want to understand? And then finally, later on in the process, we can often kind of speak to customers, but we can do some evaluation through competitors, maybe trying to reach out to potential suppliers in that industry. What's the reputation of this business in this ecosystem? Because a lot of marketplaces are much smaller than we think they are. I talk to a lot of owners in a niche space, and they will know everyone else that I'm potentially talking to. So we tend to know who our competitors are and have a relationship of some sort with them. So speaking to those competitors and just understanding, do people think well of this company? Do they like working with them when they have to do them? When they compete against them, do they feel like they play fair and work with them well? And then the communities that they're in as well. If a company has been in one place for 30 years, you'd expect someone else in the community, maybe their next door neighbor, at least, to be aware of what they're doing and the problems they're solving and the impact that they've had within that kind of community, and how intentional they've been about doing that. To say, many owners that I speak to are focused on kind of fundraising for local causes. They might do kind of charity bike rides, or they might kind of do an employee bake sale, or something that kind of connects them with the community, and the environment that a lot of their employees are also living in as well. So how are they contributing towards that as well?
It really sounds like you've created this ecosystem of where you know where to go and what to look at in order to see the behavior and actions of the values of the organization. And
Yeah.
so it's also a note to why having some of those strategic marketing aspects in
Mhm.
place, like reviews,
Yeah.
like your social, can be important to that long-term vision if you, as an owner, want to sell or be acquired or whatever that looks like. So, okay, so final question before we kind of jump out and let you leave us with some last tidbits of wisdom. For owners that are wanting to scale their impact, while staying rooted in their values, what are the benefits of seeking outside support and outside expertise? How can that, what are the benefits of that? And then how can they make sure that they're bringing in the right advisors?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We all have a set of gifts and skills and abilities that have enabled us to get where we are today, but none of us can do everything. So for me, it's really important to partner with people who are good at what you're not good at,
Mhm.
because that helps you unlock value faster. And it also unlocks your time to focus on what you're really good at, whatever your superpowers are. And then we can also leverage the experience of others to do things better. One thing I loved about my MBA experience is the leadership ethos of the Kellogg School of Management is around building leaders that turn to people around them and find the best solution together, because those leaders know that they only have a slither of knowledge in the grand scheme of things. So if I bring an expert from sales and marketing or from finance or from operations, and we bring that team together as an executive team, we're going to make better decisions as a unit than I'm ever going to be able to do on my own, because I only see a small slice of the pie. So sometimes we have those roles within our organization and we can pull them together. Other times we haven't quite reached the scale or the scope that justifies having something internally, and investing in that internally. So partnering with a third party and bringing in those advisors in the similar role that I played as a consultant, bringing an expert in who's done this 1,000 times means you're going to get value much, much faster. And I find a good calculation that owners can do takes just 10 minutes. Spend 5 minutes writing down how much time this will save you, and how much value you can deliver from having those extra hours back. And then spend another 5 minutes writing down the value that will be delivered by implementing this. And then add those two buckets of cash together. And if that is greater than the cost you're going to pay a third party, then you should definitely bring someone else in. They can help drive that time to value much faster. You can focus on what you're really good at. That might be delivering more sales, and then you have more revenue into the organization while you ramp up your marketing that then drives more leads into the future. So find the right people to partner with on the right problems that are going to deliver that maximum value and fill that gap that you know you have, and that we all have within our skill set, to make sure we're solving the best problems and delivering the best value for our whole organization and our customers as well.
That would probably be the best 10 minutes that someone has spent all year, is to think about where you can take your time back. And, I think oftentimes as an owner, there's a lot of emotional aspects that come in with your time and not wanting to give things away because you can do things the best.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to relinquish that for a lot of reasons, but that's such a quick, practical way to really force yourself to sit down and think about what are the opportunity costs? What is that opportunity cost of not doing this? So,
Yeah.
okay. So taking that 10 minutes, that is something they can do right now to determine if it's the right fit to bring someone in for support. And if not really if, it's more as to when. So what is one final thing you would say that an owner could do now, start now, to help make sure they're continuing on their journey in a strategic way, protecting their values? What would be that leave behind practical application?
I find as leaders, we're often in a situation where we have to do more talking than listening. So I think the most valuable thing we can do is do more listening than talking. So two things you can do. One, ring up a customer. If you care a lot about your values, ask your customer what they think your values are, because that will give you a really good impression of how someone who's engaging with your organization is interpreting or receiving that treatment. And if they align with exactly what is posted on your website, then fantastic. You're probably doing a good job. Give that customer support rep a bonus. If they don't, ask yourself the question why, and whether that's heading in the direction that you want it to or not. Second, talk to your employees. We don't spend enough time talking and gathering feedback from our employees and really understanding the problems that they're seeing on the ground. And a lot of the time, those friction points we talked about earlier in the customer journey are exactly what the customer service team are receiving on the phone and getting complaints about, but that
Mhm.
doesn't always make it back up to the top of the organization to actually drive a long-term solution for that. So take 5 minutes, ring a customer, and take another five and speak to an employee or two, and understand what their perspective is.
So there's 20 minutes of behavior and actions that someone can take today to keep that momentum moving forward. I love that. We always appreciate something that is a practical way to get started and going down that path, because, it can feel overwhelming when you know that there's something that you're wanting to accomplish, but just not really knowing exactly how to get there. So I appreciate you sharing the 20 minutes of practical advice and action that can be taken. So, Andy, thank you for sharing a little bit of your journey and insights and expertise. I know that I found value, and I imagine that our owners that are listening in have felt the same way. So, if someone wanted to connect with you, learn more about your work at Tree and Leaf Partners, where would they reach out? What's the best way to get connected?
You can find more information about us on our website, treeleafpartners.com. Or if you're interested in more of what we've been talking about today, I speak a lot about culture, storytelling, and building businesses on LinkedIn. So you can find me. I'm Andy D. Galpin on LinkedIn.
Well, thank you again, Andy. And we'll all head over to your LinkedIn page so we can keep getting more of this.
Thanks so much for your time, Randy. It was really great speaking to you.